Hi, this is Mrs. Horseman, and I'm hoping today that I can help you understand cellular respiration a little bit better. Let's get started. First, I want you to see this is a picture of the mitochondria, and I want you to see that cell respiration occurs in three separate sections. The first one is glycolysis, the second one is the Krebs cycle, and then the last one is the electron transport chain. All of these things are going to make some important energy molecules ATP, okay? So I'm going to explain how that happens. First, we need to understand a little bit more about the mitochondria. Mitochondria is an organelle that is in all eukaryotic cells, so plant cells and animal cells and fungus cells have these. Like I said before, there's three parts of cell respiration. Glycolysis is the very first part, and that occurs in the cytoplasm. So that's going to occur right here, right outside of the mitochondria, okay? Once glycolysis occurs, the molecules that are left over are going to enter into the mitochondria, and that's the Krebs cycle is going to happen there. It's going to finish breaking down those glucose molecules. And then the very last part is the electron transport chain, and it's going to happen right in the inner membrane folds of the mitochondria. So what I really want you to know is that glycolysis occurs outside of the mitochondria and everything else happens inside, okay? So what the heck is cellular respiration? It's a process where cells transfer stored energy, which is the glucose molecules, and we get those molecules from the things that we eat, and it's broken down and released as ATP, which is the energy molecule that our cells can use, okay? There's two types of cell respiration. Aerobic respiration means with oxygen, anaerobic respiration means without oxygen. Today we're just going to concentrate on aerobic respiration. I really need you to know this formula. And I've written the molecular formula as well as the formula in words. So we have oxygen and glucose together gives us carbon dioxide and water and of course energy. So what are the reactants of cell respiration, and what about the products? Remember that reactants are the ones that are going into the process. The products are the ones that are coming out of the process. Okay, so let's get started. I told you before that respiration is broken down into three separate parts. So the very first one is glycolysis, and it literally means the breakdown of glucose. The glucose is broken in half. Okay, so when the glucose breaks, it's going to actually use two ATP molecules to get the process started. It's going to end up making 4 ATP. So it's kind of like putting a little bit of money in the bank. I'm going to put $2 in the bank, and then because of interest, I'm going to get $4 out, right? Pretty cool. So it's going to use 2 ATP molecules, but it's going to make 4 more. It also splits the glucose literally in half. Glyco means glucose, lysis means split, so it's going to split that glucose molecule right in half. This does not require oxygen. So if you look here, it's kind of a little fuzzy, my apologies, but here's our glucose molecule, and this means ATP energy, so we're going to use a little ATP energy, and it's going to start breaking those molecules down. And when that happens, it's going to give us, so each one of these is when that molecule splits. So we have 2 molecules left over. And as those process into the next step, it's going to give us actually 4 ATP molecules. Okay? After that is broken down, so we have the 2 separate glucose molecules, or the 2 molecules that are leftovers of the glucose, we have the Krebs cycle. At the end of glycolysis, we still have 90% of the energy contained in those 2 molecules that have been broken in half from the glucose. If oxygen is present, then those 2 molecules are going to move into the mitochondria, and this is called the Krebs cycle. This can get really in detail, so I'm kind of going to give you the easier part of it. So the intermediate molecule, so the part that was left over from over here, is going to enter into the mitochondria, and it's going to be broken down even more. So as that cycle turns, so as that molecule is continuously broken down, we're going to get carbon dioxide broken off of it, and that carbon dioxide is going to be released, and it's going to move out of the mitochondria, out of the cell, and eventually we're going to breathe it out. As that happens, we have high energy electrons that are released from that molecule, and they're going to be picked up by energy carriers, NADH and FADH2. So when we talked about photosynthesis, we had an electron carrier, NADPH. Well, these are the same kind of things, they're cousins. So NADH and FADH2 are also electron carriers. They just happen to work in the mitochondria. So as those molecules are broken down, they're going to pick up those electrons and they're going to move them somewhere else. So here's a picture of what I was talking about. We have our intermediate molecule up here, and it's going to continuously be broken down. So as soon as that intermediate molecule enters the cycle, we're going to get carbon dioxide broken off, and it's going to be released into the cell, and then we release it as a gas. We also get some energy molecules that are broken off. The electrons are going to be broken off and pushed onto those electron carriers. It's going to continue because we still have some more left over. This is the Krebs cycle. Look, we have more carbon dioxide broken off, more electron carriers. We have some ATP that's created, and then we have more electron carriers that are made over here. And then more of that intermediate molecule will enter, and it will just keep continuing in a cycle. So let's count them up so far. We need to count the energy that we've created. So we started out with one glucose molecule at the very beginning in glycolysis, and we broke it in half. When we did that, we made 4 ATP. Those 2 molecules, our intermediate molecules, entered the Krebs cycle. And as they both entered the Krebs cycle, they made each another ATP. They also made NADH and FADH2. So here's what we have so far. We've made 6 ATP, 8 NADH, and 2 FADH2. Right. So the cell can actually directly use these ATP right here, but our cell can't use these. So they're going to go into the next phase. The very last part of aerobic respiration is the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is going to use those electron carriers that were created in the Krebs cycle and in glycolysis to create ATP. So here's what happens. I said those ETC uses the energy carriers to make ATP in the electron transport chain. So we see here the NADH is going to give its electrons to the electron transport chain. So these are proteins that are in the mitochondrial membrane, so right inside, okay? Those proteins are going to act as carriers. They're going to give the electrons to the next protein, to the next protein, to the next protein, okay? So this NADH molecule is going to give electrons to this protein. It's going to continue to pass on. The FADH2 is also giving up its electrons, and they're going to go down this electron transport chain. And then eventually those electrons are going to be dropped off. I've told you before, electrons have to go somewhere. They can't just bounce around the cell. It'll end up destroying the cell. So they have to go somewhere. So that's why these proteins are picking them up and passing them on, and eventually they're going to have to be dropped off. The final electron acceptor is the oxygen molecule, okay? And that's the gas that we breathe in. The whole purpose of us breathing in that gas from the air is so this process can happen and our cells can make energy. So the oxygen is going to pick up those electrons. When it picks them up, it's also going to pick up some hydrogen ions that are hanging out over there, and it's going to create water, okay? And that water for us is excess. We are going to release it somehow. Our body's either going to use it or we're going to excrete it through the urine. But that's not the entire process because we still haven't made our ATP yet. So after these electrons are dropped off through the electron transport chain, that gives these proteins actually a little bit of energy. So if you notice here, we have a bunch of hydrogen ions inside the membrane, and we have a lower concentration of ions outside of the membrane. So we have a high concentration to low concentration situation. That's ideal because, just like what we've talked about before, those hydrogen ions that are in a high concentration gradient are going to be driven to the low concentration gradient. But they can't go through the membrane, right? They can't go right through here because they're ions and they have a charge. They have to go through that protein carrier, which in this case is, again, ATP synthase. So those hydrogen ions are going to go through the ATP synthase, and as they go down, it's going to turn like a turbine, and it's going to grab an ADP and a phosphate molecule and slam them together. And it's going to make our, you can barely see it over here, it says ATP. It's going to make our ATP molecules. All right, so now if this continues to happen, we're going to start to get a hydrogen concentration down here, and that's going to be a bummer because we need more at the top. So as those electrons are falling down the electron transport chain before they get to the oxygen, they're actually giving off some of the energy that they had. So the cool thing is, because of that energy that's being released, we know that molecules move from low concentration to high concentration because of protein pumps and because it uses energy. So those electrons that are being transferred from here to here are actually giving energy to the proteins, and it's allowing those hydrogen ions to be pumped across the membrane from low concentration to high concentration. That's a really complicated way of saying all of the electron molecules, or the electron carriers, are helping process the electron transport chain, and essentially it's going to create a whole bunch of ATP molecules. Okay, so the energy from NADH and FADH2 is passed to the carrier molecules in the inner membrane. Okay, so that's these. Oxygen that's brought into the cell helps make water. So it picks up those electrons. The oxygen picks up electrons, it's added to hydrogen, and it makes water. Every time two electrons move down the electron transport chain, the hydrogens are pushed across the membrane. And because of that, hydrogen ions can now move through the ATP synthase. This causes ATP to be created. And essentially, for every glucose molecule that is broken down, we are going to get 34 ATP molecules just from this process. That's a lot. So let's count them up. We started out with, remember I said there's 3 phases of cellular respiration. So the first phase is glycolysis, and that's where the glucose is essentially split in half, glycolysis split in half, and we get 2 ATP molecules. We also get some NADH that's going to move over here. Or sorry, the NADH, you can't see it, it actually moves here. The leftover molecules from when that glucose is broken in half moves into the Krebs cycle, and it's going to continue to be broken down. So while that occurs, we still get some more electron carriers that pull electrons off, and we make 2 more ATP. After that, we have no more of the glucose molecule left, but we still have these energy electron carriers that are going to go into the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is going to use those electrons to drive ATP synthesis, so the production of ATP. All right, so we get that right here. But in order for that to happen, remember, it has to have oxygen at this point. So only if oxygen is available are we going to be able to make this amount of energy. So if you add it all up, we have 2 ATP that are made here, 2 ATP that are made in the Krebs cycle, and then another 34 ATP that are made in the electron transport chain. So that gives us about 38 ATP. And they say about because it's not an exact precise number, but if you know 36 to 38 ATP, that would be awesome. Okay, so before we move on, you need to make sure that you have the answers to these questions. What are the steps of aerobic cellular respiration? There's 3. How much energy is used to get glycolysis started? So what ATP is actually invested into this process? What does glycolysis actually mean? What is the overall purpose? So what's the point of glycolysis? What's the purpose of the Krebs cycle? How many energy carriers are made between glycolysis and the Krebs cycle? What are the electron carriers used for in the ETC, or the electron transport chain? And lastly, why does aerobic respiration require oxygen? So hopefully you're going to be able to answer those questions. If not, you need to make sure that you are asking questions in class and you come see me for help. I hope that helps, and I'll see you soon.